Hello everyone, this is Y. Manohar Reddy, Assistant Professor, Department of Cybersecurity, Institute of Aeronautical Engineering. Today I am going to discuss about the next concept as user group management in database management system. So now in this session I am going to discuss about user group management in database management system. So how we are going to create the users, how we are going to manage the users in the group, who is the role to do all this user group management in database management system. Today we are going to discuss. Let we see how user group management is happening in the DBMS. So user group management. So creating the users and managing the users of all in the group is called as user group management. So now user group management of users that were given access to the database. Why we need to create the users in the group means the users are going to access the database. Users are going to access the database. Users are going to modify the database. But some of the users may have the permissions to modify the database. And some of the users may not have the permissions to modify the database. So who will do this all the users management, user group management is nothing but administrator. Database administrator, DBA. The role DBA, database administrator, can manage all these user group management in the database management system. Because administrator have all the rights to creating the users or giving the permissions to the users, accessing the database or modifying the database, right? So this is all will do by administrator only, so that he can call it as a DBA, that is nothing but database administrator. So now look at this definition. The user group management of users that were given access to the database is the role and responsibility of the users or users with the administrator role. So here what we are going to understand from this means administrator role can give a chance or access to the users who wants to use the database or who wants to access the database or who wants to modify the database. So administrator role can give all access to the users, So now the administrator has the responsibility to manage how other users in your organization access your database. So suppose you can take all the campus. In that campus, all the users wants to access the network, access the database or anything. But how they can access all this? Because the administrator give access to the public so that all the people inside of the organization can access the database or access the network, right? So like the way administrator has a responsibility to manage how other users in your organization access your database. For example, the administrator can add new users, block access to users who have left the organization, and help users who cannot log in. So what is the thing we have to understand from this? The administrator can add new users, that is nothing but new employees, block access to the users who have left the organization. That means who are left from the organization, they can block access to the organization. So they do not have any authorization to access all the details about the organization, and help users who cannot log in also. The users who may not log in, they will also access the database with the help of permissions, or may not be accessed, they don't have without any permissions. So like the way administrator can give all the permissions to the users who can access to the database or who can access to the network, they all will be done by administrator role. So administrator roles, here we can see administrator have the following responsibilities. One is add new users. Whoever join into the organization, whoever join into the database, that all the new users will be added by the administrator, like a WhatsApp group in the database, right? WhatsApp group in the administrator. So delete users, whoever left from the organization, the administrator can delete all the users who are not inside of the organization. So he can add the users whoever joined into the organization, and he can delete the users whoever left from the organization, and manage user access. Whoever in the organization, who the ever organization, they can access all the parts of organizations, like examination sections or database sections or network sections, anything. They can have the access within the campus, within the organization, and set user connection privilege. So they can apply the privileges to access particular database or access particular examinations or access particular network. So they can have some privileges. So that privileges applied to access the database or to access the network. And edit user permissions also. So some of the users have the permissions to read only, some of the users can access the permissions to write only, or some of the users can have both read and write permissions, editable permissions, modify permissions. So all the different types of permissions will be there. So read permissions, write permissions, read and write permissions, both permissions, append permissions, or delete permissions. So like all these type of permissions will be given to the user with the help of administrator. So administrator can give all the privileges to the users, as well as edit the permissions if he required. Right? And next, view existing user permissions. So one user wants to see the permissions of another user. So that accessibility also given to the user. So administrator can give this all the permissions. And next, change user passwords also. User can create the password. If he is not able to log in with that passwords, the administrator can have the rights to change the password or reset the password, or you can send the link to the password resetting to the user. So these are all the administrator roles applied on the users. So you can add the new users, he can delete the users who are left from the institute or organization, and he can manage the users access also, and he can apply the privileges. He can apply the privileges to the users, and he can edit the permissions, whoever having the permissions, user permissions, and he can view existing user permissions. He can view or delete or modify or anything he can do, and change user passwords also. He wants to change the password. If users login passwords are forgettable, then he can able to rechange or reset the passwords from the administrator side. So these are all the administrator roles applied on the users. Right? And after doing all these responsibilities, he'll having some ethics, some policies regarding passwords and regarding administrator roles. So what are the things? First one is what? Identity and access management on IBM Cloud. Identity and access management on IBM Cloud. So this term tells that what are the things you are going to have an identity inside of the organizations, and what are the things you are going to access inside of the organization. So identity and access management, that is nothing but IAM on IBM Cloud. So what it tells, we'll look at here. Identity and access management enables you to securely authenticate users for platform services and control access to resources consistently across the IBM Cloud platform. So IBM Cloud platform, on the IBM Cloud platform, so this enables you to securely authenticate users for platform services and control access. So platform services and control access to the resources will be done by consistently through IBM Cloud platform. For example, with only a single login to IBM Cloud with your IBM ID, you have access to any of your service consoles on their applications without having login to each of them separately. So whatever the IBM have different types of services, without all other services IDs, You can have a single IBM ID. With that IBM ID, you can access all the applications or all the services regarding the IBM can access. IBM can access. So you don't want to have all the other service IDs, all other service logins. Instead of all other service logins, you can have only one IBM ID, only one IBM authentication. With that only you can access all the services of IBM Cloud. You can access all the IBM Cloud services with a single IBM ID. With a single IBM ID, with a single IBM authentication, you can access all the service controls, all the service consoles of IBM. You can access. And second one is password policy. So password policy. Administrators can update or delete the existing password policy or create new password policies and assign a specific password policy to a user on the Manage User Console page or by using REST API endpoints. REST API endpoints. So password policy, he can apply the different combinations of passwords, that create new password policies, that existing new password policies and everything will with the help of manage users console page or by using REST API endpoints. So he can update the passwords, he can create the passwords, he can manage all the passwords in the manage user console page. So this is what will happen by administrator only. Next, updating your DB2 warehouse on cloud instance password in VCAP service. So updating your DB2 warehouse on cloud instance password in VCAP services. After updating your DB2 warehouse on your cloud service instance password from within the web console. So web console only you can update the password. You must have also update the password in VCAP services. VCAP services. Cloud authentication password services. Environment variable of any of IBM cloud applications if the service instance is bound to the application. So we can update the passwords. We can update the passwords or change the passwords or cloud instance password by using this VCAP services. VCAP cloud authentication password. VCAP services. Right. And user defined user roles. So if you want to have more flexibility and fine-grained access control to your data warehouse. So if you have more flexibility and fine-grained access control to your data warehouse, you can create your own user-defined user roles. So that means user has to create user-defined roles to accommodate the special needs or special permissions of your organization. So user can create separate rules or separate authentication services to apply different types of special needs, or special permissions. So that is nothing but user-defined user roles. And next one, row and column access control. That is simply called as RCAC, row and column access control. So in this, row and column access control is an extra layer of data security. So it is one type of data security layers for your database. And row and column access control is sometimes referred as fine-grained access control. So FGAC, fine-grained access control, or RCAC, control access to a database table level or row level or column level. That means you can apply the passwords or you can apply the access control on basis of table wise, on basis of column wise, on basis of column wise, on basis of row wise, on basis of table wise. You can give an access control. That is nothing but row and column access control. You can give an access based on the column wise. You can give the access on based on the row wise. You can give the access on table wise. So on basis of this all the way, you can say that it is a fine-grained access control, or else you can say that row and column access control. So this is the way you can understand the password policies applied on the tables or users and rows and columns and anything, right? So you can understand this all the password policies on tables or users. Okay. The next, how can we create the users? your administrator can create the user, right? Administrator can create the user, and how he can create the user. So we already have the command like create. It is a DDL command, and it can use it to create any of the tables or any of the database objects. So here I am going to create the user. So with the help of create, user is nothing but username you have to specify. So like a create IARE as a username, identified by the password is also IARE. So here this is a username and this is a password. So when you want to create the user, you have to specify the username as well as password. You have to specify the username followed by password. So create user identified by password, so that you can user is created. Right now user is created. Now how can we log in as a user? So if you want to log in as a user to the database, so you can give this command MySQL. If you want to log in as a user in the MySQL, you can create as a MySQL space -u is a option, space username space -p as a option for the password. This is option for the user, this is option for the password. In between them you have to mention that username as IARE. You have to mention that username as a IARE, so that the user has logged on to the MySQL database as a user mode. Next, how can we apply permissions to all permissions to the user? How can we apply permissions to the user? So grant all. This is the command grant command. All specifies, all indicates all the permissions. All indicates all the permissions on database name. You have to specify the database name. Dot star to the user, who user wants to get all the permissions, which user wants to give the permissions. That username you have to specify. So here the database you have to specify, and dot star to the username you have to specify. Grant is a command which is granting all the permissions to the user from this database. So from this database the user is going to granting all the permissions. And if you want to apply a specific permission, permissions to granting to the user, then you can apply grant separate specific permission. I want to apply insert as a permission to the user. I want to apply granting insert or update on specific user. Then you can apply insert or update on database name star dot to as usual. Then next to give the username. So that these two indicates granting access to the user. So here I can granting all the permissions, or I can give only insert option is granting to the user. I can give all the granting options, or I can give only insert granting option. So if you want to give only one, you can mention like this. If you want to give all the permissions, then you can mention like this. So granting all permissions to the user, or granting specific permissions to the user. So like the way you can understand the granting permissions to the user. How can we show the grants for the user? So what are the permissions applied to the user? You can see from this command. Show space grants for username. That is nothing but username at the rate specified by the target machine, specified by the local system. Or else you can simply mention like show grants for username. Like this also you can see all the permissions applied to the user. You can see all the granting permissions. Whoever the permissions applied to this user can see all the list of grants here, right? So this is the way you can understand the display grants for the user. And a last, drop user. So how can we drop the user? So simply we can use this command, drop user space username. So mentioning the username and dropping the username will be done by this drop command, right? So this is the way you can apply the drop command to the user, right? And see what is the use of this data control language. Why we are going to talking about this data control language means the all user permissions, all user or group permissions will be handled by this language. DCL language, that is nothing but data control language. Data control language. So how you are going to give the control to access the data for the user? How you are going to give access or give control to access the data for the specific users? So DCL includes a commands such as grant and revoke, which mainly deals with the rights. Rights are nothing but rules and permissions and other controls on the database system. So what are the things? What are the commands we are having here? Grant and revoke. So grant command. This command gives users access privileges to the database. Access privileges. So access privileges are nothing but access controls to the database. So how the privileges are we are going to access from the database? We are using this grant command. And similarly revoke. This command withdraws the user's access privileges. So after applying the permissions to the user, if you want to roll back or if you want to revoke the permissions, you can apply this revoke to get back your access privileges from the user given by the using the grant command. So whatever the permissions you are applied by the grant command, you can roll back them. or you can revoke them with the help of revoke the command. So this command withdraws the user's access privileges given by using the grant command. After performing grant command only, you can revoke you can apply the revoke command. Without applying grant command, you cannot roll back your privileges, or you cannot apply the revoke command. So syntax you can see here. The syntax is what? How can we granting? You can apply the grant command on select and update on my table to some user or another user. So you can mention the table name. You can mention the username, or you can mention the second user also, user 2. So you can mention user 1, user 2 of this particular granting permissions. So example, grant select. I just want to apply grant select. So I am applying only select option to the user. So grant select on users to Tom@localhost. See, this is the username. This is the username and this is the system name. This is the system name or database name, right? This is the system name or database name. And this is the username. So this user having this only select access control. This user is having only select access control. So like the way you can apply the grant option, grant permission on the specific user. Revoke. It is useful to back permissions from the user. So if you want to get back the permissions from the user, you can apply revoke command. So the syntax is what? Revoke privilege name. So what are the privileges you are applied on the username? So that privilege name you have to mention here on object name from username or public or role name. You can mention any of these, user or public or role. We can mention any of the thing here, name from username or something, or role name or something, right? So example is what? Revoke. I am rollback. I am revoking what? Select and update permissions. I am revoking select and update permissions on student from BCA and MCA. These two are users. This is the database name. So student is a database name, contains BCA and MCA as a users. So I am revoking the permissions of select, update from these two users, two users. I am revoking permissions from these two users from the database student. So this is all we have to understand the user group management, mainly on granting permissions and revoking the permissions. These two are very important to understand the concept of user group management, right? So this is what all we learned from this session. So we have reviewed once again from what we discussed from this session. So see here, we are discussing about the user group management. So what is meant by user group management, which understands for the administrator roles, and how can we create the user group management, and what are the roles and responsibilities, of the administrator. You can create the users, delete the users, manage user access, user privileges, editing or user permissions, existing view permissions, and changing passwords and everything. And password policies. So what are the password policies you have to apply for the password user group management? How can we apply the password policies and all, right? And next, this is also table column access or row column access controls and everything. Next, creating users, login as a user, and applying permissions, granting all permissions to the user or granting specific permissions to the user, and displaying grants, displaying permissions from the user, and dropping the users, and what are the grant and revoke from the DCL commands. This is all we understand from this concept, right? Thank you all.
Like, share and subscribe. Hit the bell icon for more updates.